welcome to the Mariah Jean Fit YouTube channel. I'm Coach Mariah. Make sure you like our videos, subscribe to our channel, and share our videos as much as possible so we can reach a broader audience. We appreciate your support and enjoy the video. Hello and welcome to another vlog and podcast by the Fit Minds podcast and Mariah Jean Fit on YouTube. And Coach Mariah here yet again. I hope you are not sick of listening to my voice just yet. There is an exciting podcast we have to cover today, and that is deciphering your food cravings. Now, I've spoken to quite a few people about this topic before I've done the podcast, and they're super excited. They're like, oh my God, I really want to hear about why I'm craving these certain foods. And there's a lot behind it. Honestly, there is a lot behind it. I'm trying to cover as much as I can in one podcast. There's going to be more. There's certainly going to be circumstances where people will have chronic conditions or diseases that will mean that they will crave particular things more than others. But this is going to apply to general population and those who are not disease prone or certainly don't have those risk factors in play. So just going to give you that little bit of a disclaimer beforehand. However, most people are going to have this experience aside from some conditions where it will differ. So first of all, I'm going to divide this into two major topics, and because we don't just have the idea of cravings for specific foods, but also hunger levels and when we have the munchies at certain times of the day, or for women, certain times of your cycle, or in general, just after you've done, large bouts of exercise, etc., etc. And also why you might be getting hungrier at particular times of the day, depending on what you've done earlier on in the day or later in the day and the timing of your meals. Now, this can not have a massive impact on your fat loss levels, meal timing and spacing meals out, strangely enough, but it does have a massive impact on the comfort levels that you have when you are going through a deficit, due mostly to your blood glucose levels. So your blood sugar, balancing blood sugar. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to talk about hunger. I'm going to go through all the different types of hunger at different stages and probably the major reasons why you're struggling and probably what you need to address to help that. So if you're getting hungry at 11 a.m. in the morning, 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning, you just got the crazy munchies and you're thinking, oh my God, I've had breakfast. Why am I hungry again? It's not lunchtime yet. Probably because of a few reasons. You may not have had enough calories for breakfast, or at least not enough nutrient-dense calories. And I'll use an example as that majority of the population are getting up in the morning and having some slices of toast, maybe with some Vegemite or peanut butter, and then off they go. They may even have a bowl of cereal and a coffee. And the interesting thing is about both of those meals is that even though, yes, they do provide carbohydrates for energy and getting a little bit of blood glucose in there and balancing your blood sugar after you've slept, there's no protein. And so people will often go to these extremes by saying, well, do you know what? I'm going to fast for the morning. I'm not even going to have breakfast. I'm going to skip it. I'm only going to have a coffee and then I'm going to eat at lunchtime. Now, there's a few issues with that as well. If we don't listen to our bodies when we wake up and we are hungry, there is a hunger hormone that kicks in at a certain time of the morning for each individual person, whereby your body is saying, my blood glucose is low. Can you please feed me? And that's where we get that hunger hormone, the ghrelin. It kicks in and says, I need food. Specifically after a long fasted state already. You've already been fasting, you've been asleep. That's what breakfast is called, it's breaking the fast. So, obviously as sports nutritionists, I've mentioned this before, we don't condone nor support the idea of fasting for prolonged periods of time. Yes, it can reduce your total caloric intake by reducing the window where you're eating food, but even then, it's still possible to overconsume your calories in that window anyway. So fasting is semi-pointless. There are some benefits to fasting if you're going for a walk, for example, and you're trying to, if you're in a calorie deficit, I won't go too far into fasting. If you're in a calorie deficit and you're going for a walk and you're trying to keep yourself distracted from the little amount of food that you're eating or the smaller amount of food that you're eating and you're quite hungry, going for a walk fasted is not terrible for you and it's not going to impact you. But obviously, as I've mentioned in previous podcasts, going for a run if you're fasted is probably not a great idea. So aside from that, the whole breakfast regime seems to get people really confused. So we want to make sure that we've got a full serving of protein. So that's a 25 gram serving now that they've established is a bit higher than the previous 20 grams. And that looks like a scoop of protein powder, maybe just chuck it in a shake with some unsweetened almond milk or some skim milk or something like that. But in that case, you still need carbohydrates. You see people kind of swinging from one end to the other, where they'll either not eat breakfast at all, they'll only have a coffee, they'll only have some toast, they'll only have some cereal, or they'll only have a protein shake. And this is where we start to see the decline, or they might just, on the way to work, grab a croissant and then they're only eating carbs and fats. So we see this decline in not only blood sugar levels, but also the satiating process of the stomach. So we know that protein can make you feel fuller for longer, right? So if you're not eating enough protein in the morning, you're probably going to feel hungry in a couple of hours. The carbohydrates will give you enough energy to get through the next couple of hours, and then the fats will also help out with things like absorbing other nutrients that you need for helping the process of provision of energy and the other biochemical processes occurring in the body. So basically, you need a little bit of each one of those macronutrients in your breakfast, a balanced meal. So this could look like having toast with your peanut butter, but just having a protein shake with it and not avoiding certain food groups in the morning, and also not avoiding breakfast. Now, obviously, if we don't avoid breakfast, we're probably not going to see that our blood glucose drops by, say, that 10 or 11 mark. But sometimes it does. It does anyway. Why? Because it's been a couple of hours since you've eaten. You've been using some glycogen for your brain. You need glycogen for your brain. And then you start to get the morning tea munchies. And even in that case, it's okay to have morning tea. There's a small little window there where you can have a little bit of carbs, give you that little bit of energy to get you through to lunch. And that's why we look at the three main meals and 1 to 2 snacks being pretty ideal for the everyday person to get through a day. And again, this is where I see common mistakes made with eating meals and trying to go and diet and eat as little as possible, is that most people will skip breakfast and they'll probably only eat lunch and dinner, and they're really big meals, and then all of a sudden they want to eat the whole kitchen at 9. So that leads me to my next points. They then get to lunchtime, or you get to lunchtime, and you're thinking, I'm going to try and make a healthy choice. I ate a croissant for morning tea and I'm feeling guilty. So now I'm just going to eat a salad for lunch. Now there's 2 mistakes they make there. Not enough protein. You might just literally get a salad that doesn't have any protein in it, a garden salad of some sort, which probably doesn't have any sort of satiating foods in it. They're going to keep you fuller for longer. No protein and also no carbohydrates, which then basically leads to a drop in blood glucose for the afternoon. So again, your blood sugar levels don't have anything to work off, and you kind of plummet. And that's where you get the 3 to 4 o'clock afternoon munchies, when we start reaching for things like chocolate bars and salty snacks, etc. And basically that whole idea of having a healthy carb-free lunch goes out the window. So what do? How do we fix this problem? I'll get to that in a second. The other point of being hungry around dinner time, this is probably the most common out of all of them that I see, is, Mariah, I do really well during the day. I'm really good, and I love that. I'm really good. Like, what's your version of good? And let me have a look at it. I get to dinner time and I just have this massive dinner, and then I just eat everything in my cupboard, and I'm eating biscuits and I'm eating lollies and I'm eating this, and I'm like, okay, cool. What have you eaten during the day? Oh, I had 2 cappuccinos and I had a Caesar salad and I had a bite of a muesli bar. I was just too busy to eat. See where the problem is there? If we're using energy during the day, you're awake, right? You're using energy. Your body is metabolizing these foods. We're turning it into glucose. We're using this energy. Therefore, does it not make sense to eat food during the day to fuel those processes? Even if you're sitting, you're still your heart rate is still, got a heart rate, you're still beating, you're still chewing through small amounts of carbohydrates, and you do need blood sugar to be balanced. What ends up happening then at dinner time is that if your blood sugar drops that low by then, the response from your body is basically sending out those hunger signals to eat as much as possible. Because if you're underfeeding your body will find a way to tell you to eat more. And sometimes it's difficult to know when to stop. So to try and keep blood glucose balanced throughout the day, we need regular meals that are balanced meals and little drip feeds of carbohydrates in between as well. Now that doesn't mean snacking every 5 seconds, but allowing yourself to have nutrient-dense meals where you have a wide array of different food types so that you can get enough of those satiating foods. Things like potato that can fill you up, not deep fried chips, but maybe some homemade potato, homemade mashed potato, and veggies and fruit, and even getting lean protein sources in your main meals. It really is not that hard, but people want to complicate it by thinking they have to go to extremes, and then they end up crashing and burning anyway. So we have to find that middle ground where hunger does not conquer us. So obviously I've mentioned blood sugar and satiating hormones. So there's a hormone called leptin, which tells us that we're full. Now it's only really possible to have that hormone released when we actually are starting to get full. But if you're not waiting after, we know that it does take that age-old saying, it takes 20 minutes to tell that that you're full, that you don't need any more food. If you're not waiting that period of time, you've just had a decent meal, you've had some veggies, lean protein. Let's say maybe you ate your lunch really late in the day, but you did have a decent meal, and you've had a source of carbohydrates, a bit of fats in there as well, natural fats like avocado, nuts, and you've had maybe some rice or some potato in there, and you're thinking, you've just eaten, you think, shit, I'm still hungry. I'm still hungry. Now there's a few questions you need to ask yourself. Number one, have you had enough water for the day? Probably not. Most people are not drinking enough water. Like, majority of the population are just not drinking enough water. Could it possibly be that if you have a glass of water, or just wait a little bit after your meal, as well as having a glass of water, that can't hurt, will that assist in balancing out your, number one, your blood glucose, waiting for the response from the carbohydrates? But number two, obviously the satiating hormone leptin, which will come through as well, and also hydration. If you are adequately hydrated, we actually find that when we are not drinking enough water, we have these same signals sent to our mouth and our taste buds to tell us that we're thirsty. Same ones are sent there to tell us that we're hungry. So it's very difficult to tell the difference between the two. You kind of get that pasty mouth feeling, like I could eat something. And it's funny, but in a lot of the cases, our bodies are actually asking us to drink more water. Now that doesn't mean drink water instead of eating meals, but it certainly means that if you're looking at your water intake for the day and you've only had one bloody glass since the morning, probably going to be a hydration issue. So it's just that mindfulness of, how much water have I had today? How much clear water, not coffee, how much water have I had today? So waiting obviously to see whether or not you're still hungry, 20 minutes, half an hour, and obviously drinking water. And those satiating hormones can only kick in if you have literally been having balanced meals throughout the day to create satiety. So where you're feeling satisfied and you don't feel like you're a bottomless pit. Now there are going to be some foods that are not highly satiating, and they will include things like lollies and chocolate. And would you believe it? Yes, caffeine is an appetite suppressant, but when you drink liquid calories like milk, and the like, it doesn't actually fill you up. It's just something that can go through you quite quickly. There are lots of things like soft drinks as well, for example, and juices. They're not going to fill you up. So there's a lot of foods that people can consume, cookies and cakes and things, that are not going to fill you up, and they will give you a little burst of energy, but they're not going to fill you up. So it's important that we have these main meals with the lean sources of protein and some fruit and veggies in there. So fruit in your snacks, veggies in your main meals, to ensure that you feel fuller for longer. The job of fiber that we see that is in vegetables, legumes, nuts and seeds, etc., is also to help keep us fuller for longer and aid our digestion, and obviously to prevent things like cancer and chronic disease. So it all points to the same thing: balance, eating plenty of fruit and veggies. You're not going crazy with your fruit and veggies, just sticking to the 2 fruit and 3 to 5 veg daily, and lots of variety and foods that keep you fuller for longer, including those lean protein sources and natural fat sources like avocado, nuts and seeds, and olive oil. Even eggs. Eggs are a great one because they have protein and fats in them. Obviously, this doesn't apply to anyone who has an egg allergy, by the way. If I am pointing out things that are foods that you're allergic to, please don't listen to me. Obviously don't eat foods you're allergic to. So, another factor that I haven't mentioned is being hungry because you haven't slept enough, and this can impact, and it certainly does impact, insulin sensitivity. If you're a male and you're getting less than 7 hours sleep, you will have an impact on your insulin sensitivity, which basically means your ability to identify food as energy available for the body to use. So basically it makes you get more of that release of that hunger hormone, and you just feel like you're never satisfied and you have zero energy. For women, it's less than 8 hours. Now, in the case of parents listening to this, you're probably laughing and thinking, okay, cool, great, I'm not getting anywhere near that. Keep in mind the days that you are particularly sleep deprived, you're probably going to be, number one, hungrier than usual, and number two, lower in energy than usual and more irritable than usual, number three, and four, thinking a little bit more negatively than usual. So there's a lot of science into sleep and the lack of sleep and sleep deprivation and the effects on a human being, and it is enough to literally drive you mental. On top of that though, you will get lots of crazy cravings with sleep deprivation. It doesn't mean you need to give in to them. Just because you are getting these cravings doesn't necessarily mean that they directly correlate to what your body wants and needs. It actually could be a sign that your body is telling you you need to sleep. So sometimes going home for that afternoon nap, whether you encourage the family to do the same or trying to get naps on weekends and making it actually a part of your lifestyle, is going to be crucial for you to avoid these crazy reactions especially in the morning as well, when we wake up and we have a really poor response to food and our insulin is impaired. Our insulin sensitivity is impaired. So obviously, yes, we now know that lack of sleep can impact hunger levels. You're hungry because you're eating too little required for your deficit. So also a very common issue I see is that people are basically just not eating enough in general. You know, they're like, oh, I'm going to diet and I'm going to eat 1,200 calories. Now, if you're a female and you weigh around 80, 90, 100 kilos, even 70, 80, 90 kilos, and you're trying to eat 1,200 calories, even for somebody who weighs less than that, you're going to meet a dead end pretty quickly, in that you're going to get bloody hungry and your body's going to adapt to those lower level of calories fairly quickly as well, in that your body has these kind of protective responses. If you undereat your food for too long, it simply doesn't want to do shit, and you end up plateauing. Not only that, but you basically spend weeks on end being particularly hungry for no particular reason at all, where you may have been able to consume an extra 500, 600, 700 calories in some cases than you were before, and actually getting better results. So the age-old fight I have with my clients is, I think I need to be eating less than I'm eating. And I often question why they came to a nutritionist to tell them what to do. However, the indication that you are under-eating is usually that you have a lack of energy, you start to feel really slow, your cognitive function slows down, and specifically along with that, you start to plateau with results after a few weeks. And you want to eat your whole kitchen. You just start binging. And so it kind of defeats the purpose of going into a deficit. So these hunger levels going through the roof can actually usually be responsible for your demise, where you keep having this yo-yo diet occurring because you haven't found that balance in the middle. And so more common with women than men, I have seen. Men seem to feel okay with not eating next to nothing. But definitely with women, I've seen that there's this common misconception that you have to eat as little as possible, and if anything, that could impact you quite negatively in the long run. And it doesn't make it go faster. Eating 1,200 calories does not make you lose body fat faster. That's not how it works. Your body will only part with so much in a particular period of time, depending on lots of different things. But there's no point in under-eating your calories, because then when you go and try and exercise or even move for the day, your heart rate will be far less responsive. And therefore, you won't be able to burn as many calories. So, the next point, hungry because you're due for your period. This one is interesting, and as a result of the hormone called progesterone in women. For men, you can probably tune out for the next couple of minutes. But progesterone is responsible for basically the crazy cravings that you get when you're due for your period. Now, there are lots of ways to battle this, because when you are due for your period, you actually need a little bit more water than usual. Now, that's pretty logical, right? For a process for us to, expel the menstrual cycle, the menstrual blood that we get, we need more fluid for that process, and also the swelling of things like the uterus and our reproductive organs. So you might have noticed that your weight spikes when you're due for your period because of obviously the extra fluid retention. So then we need to drink more water to help replenish and to remain hydrated. But along with that, we get these cravings. Now, I will talk a little bit about how to battle those cravings a little bit further along, but sometimes you are hungrier than usual because of your period, and it is because of the hormone progesterone, where we get a little bit of a spike in cortisol and the stress hormone, and we have a bit of a response with our hunger hormones along with that. So again, too much cortisol in the system can often set off our hunger hormones, whereby basically we start to want to eat more food to make us feel better and reduce our stress levels to give us more dopamine. But this can be a really toxic cycle to get into. When you figure that out and you figure out, oh shit, food has been giving me, and especially too if you're binging, or for example, if you are overeating continuously and you're just eating for the sake of it when you're stressed, when you realize, oh shit, I'm eating to get dopamine, outside of my calories, it's this little light bulb moment where you realize it's not actually an addiction to the food, but an addiction to the happy hormone that is released after you consume that food in excess or you binge. So we start to get that dopamine releasing. Now, obviously, dopamine in small amounts, not so bad. But if you become fully reliant on dopamine instead of things like serotonin and oxytocin and endorphins, all the other fun, happy hormones, you can start to see why people can get pretty addicted to things like gambling, alcohol addiction, food addiction, and the like. It's literally where we basically become heavily reliant on these dopamine hits instead of, and obviously endorphins can come from exercise. Oxytocin can come from like the feeling of love. It's quite an interesting one. And obviously, receiving compliments, etc. And serotonin can come from walking and listening to music. So we can get a wide array of these happy hormones, and often we look at and think of food as being this thing to cheer us up, when really our body might be craving some happy hormones from another activity. So the next point, as I mentioned earlier, hungry because you're actually thirsty, so dehydration, probably very common as well. So imagine when you've got all of these happening, like you're not drinking enough water, you're trying to starve yourself all day, or you're under eating your calories, you're binging at night, you're due for your period, and you're really stressed, and you're looking at food as being a coping mechanism because you want to get a hit of dopamine, and you're also sleep deprived. Oh my God, right? Recipe for disaster. And it's often that you hear, I've heard this probably lately more now than ever, people blaming other things for their like fat gain, or even, for example, like, overeating calories. I don't know what's happening. There must be something else going wrong. I might have some sort of issue, some health issue. And even though, yes, thyroid issues and the like, and hormone changes can absolutely contribute to, especially female hormone changes later in life, can contribute to metabolism, possibly just not being as dynamic and active, specifically with menopause as a reduction in calorie output. And thyroid issues as well. But the interesting thing is that, amazingly, when you get back on top with your nutrition and your exercise, and things like walking and regular exercise and nutrition, eating enough fruit and veggies and eating in a calorie deficit, or in reverse, if you've been eating too little, eating a bit more to have a metabolism that's more dynamic and reactive, oh my God, these things actually start to repair themselves. And so with a lot of chronic conditions, obviously dietitians specialize in this, and being a sports nutritionist, it's not as much of my field. But with a lot of chronic conditions and diseases you see, one of the best things to do is improve your diet. So unfortunately, you can't keep trying to get by on not consuming enough fruit and veggies, and either under eating and during the day and overeating at night, or vice versa. And really just having a disarray and a disconnect with your nutrition, and then blaming something else for being the root cause of what's going on, when really it's right in front of you. So again, there are exceptions. Obviously, there are absolutely exceptions. There are going to be conditions that are completely beyond people's control, and please do not think that I am blanket statement or putting a blanket rule across. But as nutritionists, we see it a lot, that people are looking for an easy way out instead of simply applying themselves to what works consistently. Okay, so the next point of the podcast is cravings now. I'll move back to the previous point that I missed. Final point, you're hungry because you're eating too fast, or you're not chewing your food properly. Again, another issue, a lot of people don't sit down to eat, so they're running around and they're having a bite of their sandwich and they're kind of shoveling it in. They're not really drinking enough water, and they're just smashing in food. It is well known that if you chew your food more, even just a little bit more than what you have been previously, if you properly chew your food, that your hunger levels can be reduced by a whopping 15% daily. Holy shit. Crazy, right? Just chewing your food properly. Actually chewing it. And what we have to do is we actually have to like massacate it in our mouths, like smush it into a mush before it ends up being swallowed. And you probably think, oh, I really don't do that. No, most people don't, because they are rushing around. They don't have enough time and they're time poor. So they're shoveling food in their mouths. Take your time with your meals, savor them, eat with a smaller spoon, eat your dessert with a smaller spoon, have smaller bites. Try not to rush through your meals. Sit down and eat them. Please stop walking around and eating. It is ridiculous when people do that. If you have to have something in the car, yeah, okay, sure, take a smoothie with you. But in these cases, take your time with your eating, chew it properly, slow down with it. If you're eating too fast, you also don't allow for the proper digestive enzymes to do their thing. And that's where you can see things like getting the hiccups, being bloated, getting a lot of gas and being quite uncomfortable. Obviously, there's lots of reasons why we can get bloating, obviously along with things like inflammation in the gut, simply from actually one of the most common reasons for inflammation is overconsumption of things like alcohols and processed foods. So in that, chewing your food properly allows for that digestive process, which starts in the mouth, to properly occur all the way through to the large and small intestine. So, cravings, next topic. Obviously, I gave hunger a bit of a wrap at the start, but now we want to talk about specific cravings, which is going to help a lot of people today, hopefully. And unfortunately, all this does really is just create a better self-awareness with what you're doing and what you're eating. And if you continue to do what you were doing before, I can't help you. So, first of all, stress eating. You're not actually hungry, you're stressed. This is, I guess, amongst everything, people always talk about stress levels and reducing stress levels, and how do I do that? I won't dive into that today, but I will say that you cannot keep blaming stress for your overeating. I'm not a dietitian, I don't work in behavioural dietetics, and I certainly shouldn't, but I touch on the topics very briefly, and I find that if you are having really complex issues with binge eating, eating whilst you're alone, etc., or not eating, or starvation periods, or even things like bulimia, etc. Yes, I have struggled with these eating disorders myself in the past. No, I did not have a 4.5-year university degree to really deep dive in with these types of conditions, and my suggestion is to seek out a dietitian to assist with your behavioural eating patterns, specifically if you haven't been able to get past them, and it's been quite a long time. That requires a dietitian, and funnily enough, it's very difficult to get into them because a lot of people struggle with this problem. But once you do get into a dietitian, it can be, I suppose, like a breath of fresh air for someone to understand that you have a connection from your emotions to your food, so emotional eating, etc., and they can help you with that. They absolutely can help you out with stress eating as long as you are willing to work with them. Okay, so the next point. Having to have something sweet after savoury. This is something that I actually find I'm guilty of. What I find helps me, just from a personal standpoint, I alternate my meals. So I have sweet for breakfast. I sometimes have sweet or savoury for morning tea, and then I have savoury for lunch, sweet for afternoon tea, savoury for dinner, and sweet for dessert. So I've found that this swapping between the different types, sweet and savoury, basically means I never really feel like I'm missing out. So I never feel like I have to have something after a meal because I already have that planned for a few hours' time. The other way, and that's obviously a non-official, not necessarily from a professional standpoint, just a way to, meet your sweet and savoury needs. But another reason why you might be wanting to have sweet things after your savoury meals is due to your hydration levels. So when we crave a sweet thing after our savoury, it can sometimes mean we just simply have not drank enough water for the day, or maybe we haven't had enough electrolytes. Now, electrolytes are contained in a lot of the foods that we eat, as long as we're getting an array of different types of foods. So you might find that you don't have enough potassium, you don't have enough calcium, or you don't have enough sodium, and basically that's then impacting, or magnesium, it's then impacting your hydration levels. You might have drank enough water, but you don't have enough electrolytes on board, and that's where we can start to see these cravings occurring. So perhaps look at your hydration levels and whether or not you've had enough water by lunchtime. Very difficult to put your finger on how much water you should be drinking daily, but the general consensus is anywhere between 3 to 4 litres I recommend for somebody who is exercising strenuously, and obviously more if you're a male and if you are heavier. So we can kind of go above and beyond that. Now obviously some foods we eat are going to contain water, so things like fruit and vegetables are going to contain more water, and we can receive some hydration from those as well. But most of our fluid intake comes from the fluid that we drink. So the water and hydration comes from fluids we drink. So you want to make sure that you're on top of that. Now you want to drink a lot of water, usually in the morning to lunchtime, because when you have been asleep, you haven't been able to drink water, so therefore you've got to rehydrate in the morning. So you might find that if you just drink a bit more water, that you will probably crave sweet things less after those meals, but also you may not have been eating enough carbohydrates in that meal, in that if you tried to have a salad without, potato or rice or wholemeal bread, for example, that you might be craving something sweet afterwards because your body just simply wants some carbs, which you should be giving it. So in that case, instead of having a sweet thing, maybe look at implementing a carb source into your main meal instead of just removing that and eating something sweet that's probably not going to fill you up for as long. And that's where you'll have that balance of blood sugar. So salt/savory cravings. Obviously, the obvious first answer of this is that you may have a deficiency in sodium. There has been a war against salt in the last couple of decades, probably as a result of people with high blood pressure being given the recommendations to reduce salt intake. Now, obviously this would occur in cases where they were eating significant amount of takeaway, and they may have contained large amounts of salt, but also saturated fats. So that's where we see people are over-consuming their calories, and saturated fats are not so great for your heart health and your cholesterol. But obviously there are good cholesterol fats we can consume from things like eggs. So there is a bit of a debate going on with that at the moment, but certainly in sports nutrition, when it comes to salt specifically, I must stress to you that it is calorie free. It has no calories in it. It is simply just salt. So salt is not the enemy. Salt is something that they've seen in pre-existing conditions of high blood pressure or instances of high blood pressure that does seem to spike it even further. And they're still investigating as to why. But for the everyday population, if you do not have high blood pressure, you should be consuming salt around 6 grams per day. Now, obviously there are some foods that contain sodium naturally, specifically meats and things like that that have already been cured, or they've had salt added to them as a preservative, and packaged foods which have sodium added. So if you're tracking your food, you can actually also track your sodium levels because it will tell you in your nutrients panel. So that's the handy part about sodium intake. The interesting thing though is that if you are exercising strenuously for around 1.5 hours a day, even sometimes half an hour, 45 minutes depending on the intensity, you will be losing sodium. So your body will be expelling more fluid and losing salt. So you need to rehydrate with more salt. Now, that doesn't mean eating salt out of the packet like it's gone out of fashion, and it certainly doesn't mean that you need to just have random bouts of salt throughout the day. But my suggestion is to look at getting your 6 grams in your main meals at least, so that 2 grams in breakfast, lunch and dinner, and then obviously allowing for that little bit extra in packaged foods. And if you are still feeling ridiculously thirsty, even though you think you've drank enough water, etc., and if you are starting to have things like cramps and the like, it could lead to a sodium deficiency, and if you are craving salty foods. So it's very difficult to make that blanket statement though that you're deficient in salt or you have a salt deficiency. Another sign of sodium deficiency is low blood pressure. And you can start to weirdly get sweet cravings and just be hungrier than usual if you're not having enough salt. I actually had a sodium deficiency myself in one of my first competition preps, and I didn't realize until basically I started to feel a bit dizzy, then had my blood pressure checked, and I was talking to my coach, this was a little while ago, and he said, "How much salt have you been eating?" And I said, "Oh, I think I've been eating enough." And we found out I just wasn't consuming enough salt. I was only consuming the minimum requirement daily of 6 grams, but because I was training extensively and I was doing a lot higher number of steps and a higher energy output, I was losing a bit more salt, and therefore I had to add a bit more back in. So sometimes it can be a bit trial and error if you are exercising intensively. But if you are exercising 4 to 5 times a week, you should be definitely getting your 6 grams a day plus a little bit extra on top of that. So add table salt. Yes, I said table salt, not Himalayan. Table salt because it has iodine, and one of the other deficiencies we do see is iodine deficiencies. Specifically more now than ever with this crazy like increase and influx of Himalayan salt being popularized. Himalayan salt is beneficial because it does come with potassium, so another fun little electrolyte. However, it doesn't come with iodine, so it's actually missing iodine. What I like to do is combine table salt and Himalayan salt in the same salt shaker together, and then I get the best of both worlds and pop that on my food. So if you can't taste the salt, you've got a problem. You need to be able to taste some salt when you're adding it to your own food. The difference with deep fried takeaway foods, they've added the salt for you, and probably a lot, because it makes it taste nice and it helps it preserve the food. But obviously with your food, if you're cooking it yourself, you might need to add salt. In fact, you definitely need to add salt into the meals that don't have salt in them already. So have a look at your packages of your sauces and things and see how much salt is in those, and that will give you a good indication of how much you need to add. So obviously the other deficiencies you may have with craving salt is calcium and potassium. Again, it's electrolytes. I know, crazy, right? Like all of this is pointing towards electrolyte deficiencies when it comes to salty things, because specifically our body will tell us we need more sodium if we don't have enough, so then we get a salt craving. But also hydration requires some other electrolytes like potassium and like calcium and magnesium. So you may have a deficiency in another electrolyte as well, and in that case you need to start consuming foods that are higher in calcium and potassium. So things like banana for potassium and calcium. Obviously there's an array of foods. In fact, some greens will have high levels of calcium, but you can get it from low-fat dairy products as well. So in certain amounts, people can be under consuming calcium, and as a result we can see that we actually weirdly have a salt craving. So we don't have an inbuilt system to tell us that we're missing out on specific electrolytes. So sometimes it will just tell us to reach for salt, and sometimes sweet things as well, funnily enough. So this can cause low blood pressure, or even, and it can come from low blood pressure as well, but adrenal fatigue can cause salt cravings. So if you have, basically if you're stupidly fucking stressed, you will find sometimes you might actually have salt cravings outside of the dehydration, etc. People can experience salt cravings if they've got high levels of cortisol and they've got adrenal fatigue. Now, adrenal fatigue can be battled simply by, I know it sounds stupid, but reducing your stress levels and sleeping more. And a lot of that will come down to protecting your peace. I always talk about this, is that removing those things from your life that simply just are stressful and that are adding on top that you probably don't need. But again, not something I'm going to dive into today, because this is something that we can always do with a professional such as a psychologist. So the next point, deep fried or oily cravings, needing natural fats. Okay, so if we're getting deep fried or oily cravings, you want chips and you want, I actually rarely get deep fried cravings myself, just because I know it makes my gut feel gross. But if you're craving like oily burgers or, just like things like, I know that in comp prep I was craving sausage rolls and pies of all things. I never ate them, but it's your body basically craving good fats. It's craving omega-3s, which sometimes if you're dieting, if your fats are going to be a little bit lower, you may not be getting enough. So basically getting your fats up a little bit more, but good fats, not getting saturated or trans fats. So none of that deep fried crap and cooking with, oils that are highly processed. So you're wanting to get fats from things like avocado, seeds, nuts, macadamia nuts, pine nuts, and the like. And eggs. Eggs are great because they contain the profile for good cholesterol and some omega-3s as well, and even some iron. So oily fish as well. Salmon is really good. If you don't like fish, that's totally fine. You can actually supplement omega-3s. It's one of the most common deficiencies we see, is that people just aren't getting enough omega-3. You can supplement that back in. There are odorless fish oil tablets, and even little, you can get spoon versions of where you kind of drink a liquid. So often if you're craving lots of deep fried things, probably have an omega-3, you might have an omega-3 deficiency. And interestingly enough, we actually need good fats in our diet to help us absorb other vitamins, which obviously then help with the energy provision and processes of metabolizing foods. So basically, fancy terminology for if you're craving deep fried things, you may actually need the vitamins that are only soluble with fats. So with fats, things like omega-3s, they actually help us break down and absorb vitamins A, D, K, and E. Okay, so there's a wide variety there in the alphabet, But obviously we know we get sunshine gives us vitamin D, so you might need some sunshine. It might be that your body is saying, I want some deep fried oily things because I actually need sunshine. I know, crazy, right? I need vitamin D and I want the fats to soak up the vitamin D, but I'm not getting the vitamin D, so I'll just crave the fats. And it's an interesting little correlation that happens there. Now, you can obviously look up what foods are rich in these particular vitamins, but obviously a little bit of sunshine, 15 to 20 minutes daily is recommended. There is a particular, I think it's called a DUI or a DIU or something, requirement of vitamin D daily, but around 15 to 20 minutes of sunshine, don't get sunburnt. Mostly greens are, interestingly enough, are going to be found, you're going to find vitamin A, K, and E are going to, green things, right? Spinach, broccoli, like all the things you've been avoiding are going to have these vitamins. Now, I know it's not a fun topic, eat more vegetables, but I can assure you if you're eating less than one vegetable a day right now, it's going to be a massive contributor. In fact, if not one of the main contributors to the reason why you feel like shit and possibly why you keep getting sick. So, these vitamins assist with, obviously, as I said, sickness, disease prevention, long-term as well, long-term illness, etc. But obviously, they don't provide energy, but they assist with the energy provision process of metabolizing carbohydrates and lipids and proteins. So basically, eat your vegetables. I keep telling people this, and I know it sounds like I'm not being an asshole. I'm saying this because it's fucking obvious. Like broccoli, beans, zucchini, collard, spinach. Funnily enough, lettuce isn't included in there because lettuce is just basically water and fiber. So please, if you can swap anything, swap your lettuce for spinach because of the micronutrients contained in spinach. But there are so many different types of vegetables. You will find some that you like and some that you enjoy, I assure you. And then obviously we've got on the list there avocados, seeds, and nuts, as I mentioned previously, different types of legumes as well. So chickpeas, lentils, if you don't like them, there are pastas that are made completely of chickpeas that you can get. So you can swap one of your wheat pastas for maybe a chickpea pasta. And things like eggs, yogurt, pumpkin, sweet potato, tomato, greens, fish, and dairy for vitamin E. So really, looking at the bigger picture, it's just eating a array of fruits and veggies, different types of lean proteins, nuts and seeds, plant-based oils if you want to cook with them, but they are going to take up some calories, and things like avocado, etc. There are ways around it. If you don't like one food, there's going to be another food that's going to provide that vitamin for you. It's just putting them into your main meals instead of just eating, just bread and ham, or just for breakfast, just having a bowl of oats but not really having any sort of fruit. So having something that you can pair with these meals that gives you an array of fruit and veggies and lean proteins and healthy fats can be the key to unlocking and actually kicking some of these cravings that you've been getting. And there's significant evidence to prove as well, there's some particular types of nuts that can literally make sweet cravings disappear. Now that doesn't mean start eating nuts in handfuls, but maybe things like pine nuts and macadamia nuts, they can go into salads and things like that, which actually can help out with these cravings that you've been having. So chocolate, lollies, sweet cravings, generally you'll find, and obviously for women, this one is very common leading into the week of your period, but deficiencies in iron, calcium, zinc, and magnesium, more common in women for zinc, magnesium, and iron deficiencies. We need more zinc and magnesium when we are due for our period and obviously have our period, and it's also to do with like relaxing the muscles. So we know magnesium is great for relaxing muscle. Zinc is fantastic for immunity, and we know that iron is fantastic for energy production. So for all of this to occur at adequate levels, we need to consume foods that have iron. So things like some lean red meats for iron. Obviously, there are some conditions where you can't eat a lot of red meat. I actually have a condition where I can't eat too much red meat. But you can also get iron from eggs and greens. There are certain greens that have higher levels of iron. Same thing though, calcium, zinc, magnesium. These are all different minerals and vitamins, electrolytes, trace elements, etc. that have, they actually have the things that we need versus what we think we need from what we've been craving. I know what some people are going to hate me for this and go, oh, look, I love chocolate. Stupid thing is first ingredient is sugar. So you're not actually getting anything that you need or want. You're just getting sugar. And sugar is okay. Obviously, it's not the devil, but there's nothing that says that sugar is an essential nutrient. So especially on your period, another thing with chocolate and sweet cravings, again, is dehydration, not drinking enough water, not having enough electrolytes, so that magnesium, the potassium. Banana has potassium, so maybe introducing banana into your diet, or potassium-rich foods that aren't. There are so many other different potassium-rich foods that do exist. Not eating enough filling foods, or under-eating your calories, as I mentioned earlier. Under-eating your protein, carbs, or fats, or having low blood sugar can lead to sweet chocolate cravings, etc. A big piece of advice I give my girls leading into their cycle is just simply supplementing magnesium and zinc at the normal recommended daily amount, and or you can start consuming something called cacao powder, CACO powder, which is a pure form of cacao bean, not cocoa, cacao. And it was all the rage a couple of years ago. It's incredibly high in natural levels of magnesium and zinc, because these are two, the magnesium being electrolyte, zinc being a mineral, is that we don't get a lot of that in our diet. We really don't get a lot of this in our diet. So naturally, so we probably need to supplement this back in. However, food is always best. I always say that food is best. So some cacao powder, you can put that in your yogurt, in your oats, or in a smoothie. It's very chocolatey, and it's great when you are due for your period or on your period, because it can actually subside those chalky cravings once and for all. So you can get some from the health food section at Woolies. It's really easy to get a hold of cacao powder, and it lasts forever. So carb cravings, you probably need more carbs. People are like, I feel like bread, and I feel like pasta, and I feel like, yes, because you probably should be eating it. It's probably one of the most obvious ones. If you're getting carb cravings, you probably need carbs. You probably need carbs. I'm talking about pasta, rice crackers, rice. If you're craving it, you probably need it. But body's probably asking for it. Now, obviously in extreme cases, we might have to reduce your rice and carb intake, specifically for comp prep clients when they get down to what I call poverty calories. But basically, my suggestion would be to start to introduce some slow release carbs, low GI carbs like brown rice, sweet potato, and legumes, chickpeas, lentils. There are beans. There are so many different types of legumes that exist. Black rice as well is another great option. Quinoa isn't too bad. It's a seed that's high in protein. But basically, this helps increase blood sugar levels. So if you've got low blood sugar in specific cases, you will probably need some carbs. You've probably not got that sustained level of release of carbs. So the solution is having slow release carbs like oats in your breakfast, like brown rice or sweet potato in your lunch, and maybe some sort of maybe a chickpea pasta or a wholemeal pasta for dinner. And in these cases as well, I always suggest switching around. If you think you're eating wheat 3 or 4 times a day, maybe you need a different type of grain, because wheat is only one bloody grain and we seem to eat a shit ton of it. So switch it up, add some rice in. There's also things like buckwheat, there's rye as well. There are literally so many different types of grains that we seem to be avoiding, but we definitely can include these in our diet. And obviously, as I mentioned, sweet potato being a root vegetable and potato being a starchy vegetable that is fantastic for filling you up, and it is not the devil. Potato is fantastic. Cook it at home, make it in the air fryer, or oven bake it. You can add a little bit of oil or maybe not, but you need to track your oil and know that takes up fucking calories. So more carbs, not shit tons of carbs, just a little bit more. And obviously with bread, if you're wanting bread, maybe go for a wholemeal option with a little bit less calories in it to fit your macros. That's going to keep you fuller for longer. If you really love white bread and you can't go without it, sure, but maybe just stick to your 1 serving a day instead of 6, instead of 3 or 4, instead of eating bread or baked things for 3 or 4 meals a day. And you will find that you'll have a better balance of blood sugar, and obviously suffice those carb cravings with the slower release and the low GI. Cheese cravings. Again, this comes back to vitamin D and natural fats, so probably craving the natural fats more than we are the cheese. Yeah, sure, we can have cheese in small amounts, especially the light cheeses, the ones that are lower in fat. But if you're getting these cravings, it's probably your body telling you might need some sunshine, because it's trying to get you to eat the fats that you need to absorb the vitamin D. I know, crazy, right? Or low iron, calcium, or magnesium again. So this all comes down to, again, getting that balance back into your diet. If you're looking for the recommendations, the Australian Nutrition Dietary recommendations, They exist. The current pyramid is actually fantastic. It's a really good guide. I do recommend going and buying and using that, because every country has actually been working on their pyramid over the last, few decades, and getting better and better and better with the recommendations based on things like the optimum levels of people's nutrients and deficiencies that they're finding with in correlation with the consumptions of these foods in these amounts. So that's how they got to that understanding, is by studying this really deeply over a very long period of time. So please don't diss the food pyramid, because it's actually better than ever. Okay, so the next point is getting full bloods done for your deficiencies. If you think you have any, I think a lot of people think they're super special and they're like, oh, I think I'm deficient. It's okay, just go get tested. Like, if you think you're deficient in something, please go and get tested. Get full bloods done. Don't let a doctor do a half profile. Do a full blood, profile. Maybe get your adrenal function tested, but mostly test for things like deficiencies in micronutrients, because if you are deficient, it should flag and it should show them that you're at the lower end, or, maybe even for women, I see the most common one is an iron deficiency. So please book in, get your bloods done. And funnily enough, the solution for having deficiencies in certain micronutrients is simply eating more of them. However, there are some people who have issues with the absorption of iron, for example. This is where we see the common iron deficiency in women, and in that case, they may look at iron infusions, etc. And also vegetarians. There will be vegetarians that need to make sure they're getting enough vitamin B, and also iron. That's another one that's quite common, and enough protein too. So not that they can't, but it's certainly something they have to keep an eye on when they go and get no pun intended, when they go get their bloods done. Okay, so carb cravings, you can get carb cravings when you've expended a lot of energy. That's another reason why you might be getting carb cravings. You may have just done a massive workout and all of a sudden you're really flippin' hungry. So you might want more protein, more carbs, and you also might need more water. I know, crazy, right? You need to replenish what you lost when you were exercising, and the same goes with your carbohydrates. You lost glycogen and you lost, glucose. So really, we're looking at replenishing those carbohydrates so that you can top up those stores again and that you have enough energy to go again, or even just to function. So if you've done a big leg workout, if you're particularly hungry afterwards, I'm not surprised, and you probably just need to listen to your body and eat a little bit more carbs, or obviously time your food so that you have a little bit of a bigger meal after that workout. And I mean bigger meal as in just more calories, where you've got more satiating foods in there, so those lean proteins, brown rice and potato and the like, where you're not just trying to diet and eat as little as possible, because again, this will affect your carb cravings and your blood sugar levels. So, eating an array of different foods. Did you know the body needs and requires 50 different types of foods? I know, fucking bananas, right? You're thinking, oh shit, I only eat like 3. 50 different food types. And when we talk about different food types, we're talking about bread is one of them. Bread, one food type is bread. Banana, I know, right? Don't you wish that bread, if you baked it differently, like, oh, but what about a sandwich and a bun? Like, that's 2 different food. No, it's not. It's one food type. So, for example, a type of seed, that will be a food type. A type of nut, that's a food type. So almond and macadamia are 2 different food types. A type of vegetable, say celery versus spinach. So that's another food type. Food types, different food types. Egg versus chicken breast, 2 different food types. So if you look at getting a little bit more variety in your food types in the week, 50 is the optimum level to reach all of your essential micronutrient intake. So currently, if you eat the same damn thing every day for lunch and dinner and breakfast, stop doing that, right? Because you're gonna have a nutrient deficiency and you're gonna feel like shit. So introducing lots of different food types. So this is where I find that if I'm having something, it's okay to have a sandwich for lunch, but maybe have a little side salad where you've got a different, like 3 or 4 different types of veggies there. You might have some carrot sticks and some spinach leaves and some cucumber and some tomato, and tomato's a fruit. So you've got then something as well as your sandwich that isn't going to impact your delicious sandwich, and you can still eat the fruit and the veggie serving and a little bit of fruit there as well with your sandwich. So start eating more variety. Now that doesn't mean changing your meals every single day like a mad woman. Maybe just look at rotating, or madman, rotating Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday. So the way I do it is Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday, I have the same breakfast, lunch, dinner and snacks. And then Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, same breakfast, lunch, dinner and snacks. And I mean as a day, but across the day, breakfast, snack, lunch, snack, dinner is completely different, and different food types. I try not to eat wheat twice a day, not because I'm thinking that wheat's the devil, but I want to get a variety of different grains. So I will have maybe some bread in my morning tea or my lunch, and then for the rest of the day, I try and actually get some grains from other sources and some carbs from other sources like potato and, the like, not just having bread, because that's one of the most common issues I see is bread and biscuits. Not the devil, just try and get more variety. Okay, so try this little experiment with yourself. Try not to eat the exact same food twice daily. Try it for the next 2 weeks, and that will actually force you to get some more variety. When you go to the grocery store, pick up things you haven't picked up in a while, like pumpkin and cauliflower, and start to work with it. Don't just put it in your crisper, put it within vision and look at ways you can incorporate that into your meals in a way that you will enjoy it. If in doubt, boil the shit out of your vegetables and mash them and maybe add some light cheese. That's one of my biggest tips, is if you don't like veggies, find a way to conceal them in your food. So, as I mentioned, there are lots of different things you can do to battle cravings, but one of the things that you shouldn't be doing is ignoring it and palming it off as, well, I just eat whatever's in front of me and I feel like cookies, so I eat them. Sure, it's okay to have intuitive eating styles. However, if it's currently not working for you and aligning for you and your energy levels are really shit, and on top of that, you're not achieving anything you want to achieve physically, maybe revisiting that method might help you moving forward. It is okay to have fun foods, as I've mentioned in previous podcasts, and you're probably getting really confused thinking, hold on, Mariah's told me I can eat chocolate and lollies. What's going on here? It's the 80-20, okay? And we know that that coincides with that food pyramid in that 80% whole foods, 20% of that are the fun foods. And incorporating that means small amounts of the things that are fun, things like chocky, things like little lollies here and there, things like biscuits here and there, sure. But for the most part, basing most of your meals off of whole foods, fruit and veg, and having the wide array of grains, legumes, nuts and seeds, eggs, and obviously nothing that you're allergic to, we would hope. So that's it from me, right on almost the hour for this podcast. Thank you so much for listening and tuning in. Looking forward to doing another one for you soon. And I'm hoping to hear about how you will go over the next few weeks with deciphering your own food cravings and actually starting to listen to your body. Okay, thanks a lot.